Welcome back to Invisible History, the channel dedicated to uncovering the forgotten forces and unsung figures that shaped our world. Today, we're peeling back the gilded facade of the Victorian age, venturing into the very heart of the British Empire's glittering capital, London. Imagine a city bustling with unprecedented energy, a global powerhouse of industry, innovation, and imperial might. Its streets teemed with horse-drawn carriages, its docks overflowed with goods from every corner of the globe, and its grand new buildings, monuments to progress, pierced the smoky skyline. This was London, a beacon of civilization, admired and emulated across the globe. But beneath its polished veneer, beneath the soaring ambitions and the relentless march of modernity, festered a truth so grotesque, so profoundly offensive, that it threatened to bring the entire city to its knees. This was the unseen enemy, an invisible force that would eventually give rise to one of the most remarkable transformations in urban history. For centuries, London had grown organically, haphazardly, like most ancient cities. Its development was driven by necessity, not by grand design. People built where they could, often without any thought for what happened to the waste they produced. From the medieval era through the early industrial revolution, the city's approach to sanitation was, to put it mildly, rudimentary. Chamber pots were emptied directly into the streets, refuse was tossed out windows, and whatever wasn't eaten by scavenging pigs or collected by rag-and-bone men simply accumulated. Rain, when it came, would theoretically wash some of this away, but mostly it just created a foul-smelling slurry that coated everything. The Thames, the mighty river that was London's lifeblood, its main thoroughfare, and its source of drinking water, was also, tragically, its principal sewer. As the 19th century dawned, the problem escalated from unpleasant to catastrophic. The Industrial Revolution, while bringing immense wealth and technological marvels, also brought an explosion in population. People flocked from the countryside to the burgeoning factories and workshops, chasing the promise of work, however grueling. In just 50 years, London's population swelled from around 1 million to nearly 3 million. This rapid, uncontrolled growth overwhelmed every existing system, but none more critically than sanitation. The old, inadequate drains, originally designed to carry rainwater, were increasingly diverted to carry human waste. The concept of a sealed underground sewage system was still in its infancy, and even where early sewers existed, they simply emptied their contents directly into the nearest watercourse, which, more often than not, was the Thames. It wasn't just human waste. The industrial boom meant factories spewed noxious chemicals and refuse directly into the river. Slaughterhouses, tanneries, gasworks all contributed their putrid effluents. The river became a dark, viscous soup, teeming with every conceivable form of filth. Yet, astonishingly, this same river was still the source of drinking water for a significant portion of London's population, who drew their daily supply directly from its increasingly toxic currents or from wells contaminated by its seepages. The irony and the tragedy was profound. The very source of life was becoming the bringer of death. The consequences were devastating, though largely misunderstood at the time. Cholera, a terrifying disease that caused severe dehydration and often rapid death, swept through the city in terrifying epidemics. The first major outbreak in 1831 claimed thousands of lives, another in 1848, and yet another in 1853. Doctors and scientists of the era, observing the patterns of disease, clung to the prevailing miasma theory. This theory, dating back to ancient times, posited that diseases like cholera and typhus were caused by bad air, noxious fumes or vapors arising from decaying organic matter. The stench, they believed, was the killer, and in London, the stench was omnipresent. It clung to clothes, seeped into homes, and hung heavy in the air, a constant, sickening reminder of the city's invisible torment. Everyone accepted it as an unfortunate reality of urban life, a consequence of progress. But in the summer of 1858, this reality was about to become utterly unbearable, forcing a city built on denial to finally confront its putrid truth. And then came the summer of 1858. It wasn't just any summer. It was an unusually hot one, a sweltering, oppressive heatwave that gripped London for weeks on end. With temperatures soaring into the 90s Fahrenheit, the already putrid Thames became an open-air cauldron, its stagnant, polluted waters baking under the relentless sun. The heat didn't just raise the temperature, it accelerated decomposition, amplifying the chemical reactions of decay, turning the river into a vast, bubbling vat of putrefaction. The once mighty Thames, the source of London's power and prestige, was reduced to a slow-moving, festering open sewer, shimmering with iridescent scum and choked with decomposing waste. What had been a persistent nuisance became an apocalyptic assault on the senses. The stench, unimaginable to those who haven't experienced it, rose from the river in suffocating waves. It was described as a combination of excrement, industrial chemicals, decaying animals, and rotting vegetables, a thick, visceral assault that permeated every corner of the city. No amount of perfumed handkerchiefs, no closed windows, no distance seemed to offer escape. Even the most affluent districts, far from the riverbanks, found themselves enveloped in the foul cloud. Meals became impossible to enjoy. Conversation was punctuated by gagging, and sleep offered little respite from the pervasive odor. People spoke of a palpable physical weight to the air, a nauseating blanket that pressed down on their lungs and stomachs. This wasn't just a matter of discomfort, it was a crisis. The prevailing miasma theory, which linked bad smells directly to disease, meant that the overwhelming stench caused widespread terror. If the air itself was saturated with the agents of illness, then simply breathing was a death sentence. Londoners, already accustomed to periodic cholera outbreaks, were convinced that the Great Stink was about to unleash an unprecedented plague. The poor, living in overcrowded tenements with inadequate ventilation and often directly beside open sewers, were suffering immensely. But crucially, for the first time, the stench reached into the very halls of power, forcing the issue directly upon those who had long ignored it. The Houses of Parliament, situated right on the banks of the Thames, became almost uninhabitable. Members of Parliament struggled to conduct business, holding their handkerchiefs to their noses, some even retreating to the rooftops in desperate attempts to catch a breath of cleaner air. Debates were cut short, sessions postponed, and the legislative body of the world's most powerful empire found itself literally unable to function because of the overwhelming putridity of its own capital. Attempts were made to mitigate the smell. Blankets soaked in chloride of lime were hung at the windows of Parliament, but they did little more than add the acrid smell of disinfectant to the already unbearable cocktail. The sheer absurdity of the situation became undeniable. Here was London, the heart of an empire, brought to its knees by its own waste. Despite the widespread fear of miasma, there was a lone voice, a brilliant but largely unheeded physician named Dr. John Snow. Years earlier, during the cholera epidemic of 1854, Snow had conducted groundbreaking epidemiological work in the Soho district. He meticulously mapped the homes of cholera victims and discovered a clear correlation. Nearly all of them drew their water from a particular public pump on Broad Street. When he famously removed the handle from that pump, the epidemic in that area quickly subsided. Snow's radical conclusion was that cholera was not airborne, but waterborne, spread by contaminated water. He was essentially articulating the germ theory of disease long before it gained widespread acceptance, clashing directly with the powerful miasma theory. His work, though scientifically rigorous, was largely dismissed by the medical establishment of the time. The stench, they insisted, was the problem, not the invisible contaminants in the water. But as the summer of 1858 dragged on, the sheer magnitude of the Great Stink began to override intellectual resistance. The public outcry was deafening. Newspapers were filled with horrified accounts and scathing condemnations of the government's inaction. The city's health, its commerce, its very reputation were at stake. The crisis had reached a tipping point where superficial solutions and continued scientific debate were no longer viable. Something radical, something monumental had to be done. And that realization, born from the suffocating foulness of London's summer, would clear the way for one of the greatest feats of civil engineering in history, a solution championed by a man whose vision would rescue London, and in doing so, revolutionize urban sanitation worldwide. With the city literally gasping for breath, the clamor for action became irresistible. The government, finally cornered by the suffocating reality of the Great Stink, could no longer defer the monumental task. But the question remained: who could possibly tackle a problem of this unprecedented scale? Who possessed the vision, the audacity, and the engineering genius to transform London's putrid chaos into a clean, functioning metropolis? The answer lay with a quietly determined civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. He had been appointed chief engineer of London's Metropolitan Board of Works in 1856, 2 years before the catastrophic summer. For years, Bazalgette had understood the depth of London's sanitation crisis, not just as a matter of smell, but as a ticking time bomb of disease. He was a man of meticulous detail, profound foresight, and an unshakable belief in the power of engineering to solve society's most pressing problems. Even before the Great Stink hit, he had been advocating for a comprehensive city-wide solution, but political inertia and cost concerns had always stifled his proposals. Bazalgette understood that piecemeal solutions, small localized drains or temporary river cleanups, were utterly futile. London needed a unified, integrated system that would collect waste from every corner of the vast city and carry it far away, beyond its residential areas. His vision was nothing short of revolutionary. An entirely new, vast network of intercepting sewers running parallel to the Thames, designed to capture all of London's waste before it could ever reach the river within the city. These massive main sewers would then carry the sewage eastward, under gravity for the most part, to distant outfalls where it would be discharged into the Thames only at high tide, allowing the outgoing current to carry it out to sea. This was an engineering marvel, far beyond anything previously attempted. It wasn't just about digging big pipes, it involved overcoming immense technical challenges. Bazalgette had to account for London's varied topography, constructing miles of deep tunnels and elevated brick aqueducts. He needed to build huge pumping stations, formidable feats of Victorian engineering, to lift the sewage from low-lying areas and propel it through the intercepting sewers. These stations, like Abbey Mills in East London, were designed not just for function, but for grandeur, almost cathedral-like in their scale and ornate design, reflecting the immense pride and ambition of the project. The sheer scale of the undertaking was staggering. Over 2,100 miles of new street sewers, collecting waste from individual homes, would feed into 82 miles of massive intercepting sewers. These would ultimately empty into 4 main outfall sewers, 2 on the north bank of the Thames and 2 on the south. To build this network, Bazalgette's teams would have to tunnel beneath bustling streets, contend with unstable ground, divert underground streams, and often work through noxious, disease-ridden soil. It was a project that would span years, require immense financial investment, and involve thousands of laborers working in incredibly dangerous conditions. Predictably, Bazalgette's audacious plan initially met with considerable skepticism and resistance. The cost was enormous, estimated at over $3 million, a staggering sum in the mid-19th century. Many politicians questioned the necessity of such an expense for what some still viewed as merely an unpleasant smell. But the Great Stink had changed everything. The sheer physical impossibility of living and working in London had finally forced their hand. In an almost poetic act of desperation, Parliament, literally holding its nose, passed the Metropolis Local Management Act of 1858. This crucial piece of legislation finally granted the Metropolitan Board of Works the authority and, critically, the funds to proceed with Bazalgette's magnificent plan. The stink had bought Bazalgette his chance, and with the financial and legislative backing finally secured, the true work began. What followed was a decade-long saga of colossal construction, human endeavour and pioneering engineering that would fundamentally redefine London's future, silencing the great stink forever, and perhaps even more importantly, unknowingly conquering the very diseases that had plagued the city for centuries. With the legislative and financial hurdles cleared, Joseph Bazalgette wasted no time. The monumental task of building London's new sewer system began in earnest. For the next decade, London became a vast construction site. Teams of engineers, surveyors, and thousands of labourers, known as navvies, descended upon the city, digging, tunnelling, and building with relentless determination. It was an undertaking of unimaginable scale and complexity. Streets were torn up, rivers diverted, and vast, deep trenches carved through the city's foundations. The challenges were immense. The ground beneath London was a complex mix of clay, gravel, and, in many areas, waterlogged marshland. Basements and existing infrastructure had to be navigated. Tidal flows had to be managed, and the constant threat of collapsing earth or bursting pipes loomed over every excavation. Despite these perils, Bazalgette's designs were famously meticulous, reflecting his profound understanding of hydraulic engineering. He insisted on using strong, durable materials, millions of bricks, tons of concrete, and ironwork of the highest quality. His sewers were not merely utilitarian tubes, they were grand, arched structures designed for longevity and efficiency. He famously championed the use of egg-shaped sewer profiles, which allowed for a greater velocity of flow even at low levels, preventing blockages and ensuring the sewers were largely self-cleaning. This foresight ensured the system would last for generations, a testament to engineering excellence. The work was brutal, dangerous, and often thankless. The navvies toiled in dark, cramped, and often foul-smelling conditions, risking exposure to disease, cave-ins, and gas explosions. Yet their tireless efforts laid the literal foundations for modern London, building a subterranean network that would become its hidden circulatory system. This was the unseen labor, the invisible effort of thousands that supported the city's magnificent outward show. The first sections of the new system began to open in the early 1860s, a testament to the speed and efficiency of the project. By 1865, the main intercepting sewers on the North Bank were largely operational, and the pumping stations at Crossness and Abbey Mills, engineering marvels in themselves, were completed. The southern system followed soon after. As each section came online, the effects were immediate and dramatic. The putrid smell emanating from the Thames within London began to recede. The exposed mud banks, once choked with black, festering sludge, gradually started to resemble actual riverbeds once more. The air over London, for the first time in generations, began to smell clean. But the most profound success of Bazalgette's system was not immediately obvious to most Londoners. They breathed easier, yes, and the fear of the great stink dissipated. What they didn't fully realize, however, was the silent war that had been won beneath their feet. As the polluted water was diverted away from the city's drinking supply, the terrifying epidemics of cholera virtually disappeared. The cholera outbreaks of 1866, the last to hit London, were contained to specific areas not yet connected to the new system, or where older contaminated water sources were still in use. This was the definitive, albeit indirect, vindication of Dr. John Snow's long-ignored germ theory. Bazalgette, designing for the miasma, had inadvertently conquered the microbe. The invisible enemy was defeated by an invisible solution. Bazalgette's grand design for London's sewers became a blueprint for urban sanitation worldwide. Engineers from New York to Paris studied his plans and implemented similar systems, forever changing how cities managed their waste and protected the health of their populations. His work wasn't just about pipes and pumps. It was a foundational shift in public health, a recognition that a healthy city required a healthy environment. It was a victory of engineering foresight over ignorance, of collective action over individual suffering. Today, Bazalgette's Victorian masterpiece continues to serve London, a silent guardian beneath its bustling streets, a testament to the vision and perseverance that arose from an unbearable stench. We rarely think about the sewers beneath us, and that is precisely the point. The greatest achievements of invisible history are often those that work so perfectly, so seamlessly, that they fade into the background of our everyday lives, becoming the very fabric of our modern world. The Great Stink forced London to literally clean up its act, giving birth to a hidden marvel that transformed the city from a putrid danger zone into a healthier, more vibrant metropolis, forever altering the course of urban civilization. And that, my friends, is another chapter in invisible history. If you enjoyed this dive into London's past, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next untold story. What other hidden historical forces would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below.